But Mr. Mossman, I wanted to talk to you about another question, if you would. I've asked our page to prepare a piece of one of the pages of the governor's proposal, and if Adam, if you would pass that out now. I want to seek some clarification, if I could, Mr. Mossman, about the fourth tier 10.95% tax bracket. In the governor's written proposal, under the recommendations section, it says it would not be indexed for inflation. And Adam, if you could get that to Mr. Mossman right away. It says it would not be indexed for inflation. Can you talk about what that means?
Sure. Madam Chair, I have a couple things on that. First, to respond directly to your question, what not indexing, I mean, under current law, all of the existing brackets are indexed for inflation, meaning that in order to prevent bracket creep, so that as individual income tax earners and payers are earning more from year to year, but their purchasing power may not necessarily be improving due to inflation and the fact that it costs more for rent and household expenses and that sort of thing from year to year, that indexing the brackets would to inflation would keep people from growing into a bracket for reasons other than real gain in their income. What I can say to your additional point, and certainly so if you didn't index the brackets, more people would end up in the bracket over time. That's the explanation to your question. What I can tell you is that you will see when you get the governor's revised budget recommendations, and I think it's incorporated into the numbers, that MMB, I'm a little bit at a loss as to the timing if MMB was able to send something over to legislative staff yesterday or not on repriced fourth tier numbers and other provisions, but the governor's revised budget recommendations do index his recommended fourth tier income tax bracket. So that bracket will be indexed like all the existing current law brackets.
So Mr. Mossman, he now has been advised or is under has the facts that if you don't index it for inflation, more and more Minnesotans would move into that fourth tier automatically without adjustments.
Madam Chair and members, yeah, the governor is aware of that, and he did make that adjustment. To be honest, I think there was some inadvertency to it early on as well, and that when we initially started modeling those recommendations, it was it's an additional step in the modeling to build the indexing in, and we weren't, as we were doing that rapidly at the department, we hadn't incorporated that into the modeling either, and it didn't get into the recommendation, and that has been incorporated into the governor's revised recommendations.
Mr. Mossman, with all due respect, it seemed like a very intentional statement on page 6 of the tax provisions. I would just ask you to look at the Senate fiscal staff analysis of what that meant, and I just want to make sure that the general public is aware of what this means when you index it for inflation. We're now going to have a readjustment of all these numbers. So if you would make sure, Adam, that he has the Senate fiscal staff analysis of it from 2/23/2011. Do you have that in front of you, Mr. Mossman?
I do, Madam Chair.
And so, have you seen this before, Mr. Mossman?
Madam Chair, no, this is the first time I've seen this.
Okay, and if we don't index that fourth tier for inflation, according to this estimate, by the year 2015, there will be 201,123 returns with the tax increase into that 10.95% tax bracket, and 12.7% of married filers, nowhere near the 5% of filers that the governor originally talked about.
And Madam Chair, I don't have any reason to, I assume this analysis is correct, I don't have any reason to think that it is otherwise. What I would reiterate, of course, is that the governor's proposal does include indexing. It has been adjusted to include indexing of the fourth tier bracket, and that is incorporated into the numbers that he has announced publicly, and it will be included in the documentation that I thought maybe came over. Again, I'm at a little bit of a loss yesterday afternoon, but we'll be in the bill language and in the revised budget recommendations that come forward. So I think that this scenario or something like this scenario is what would happen if the bracket was not indexed, but the bracket in the recommendation is indexed.
And Mr. Mossman, a final point on this from me is, right now the only thing we have to go on is the governor's budget proposal. We don't have a bill that does anything different. And so from my point of view, this is his intention until I see something that says it's not his intention. And it's certainly not official until we get language anyway. And I know we've been operating under that assumption as well, that it's not official until we see language. So we'll wait and see the language, and hopefully the governor will make the change that you've suggested.